All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining the January session of the Ohio Workforce Coalition's monthly webinar series. I am Rebecca Kusner, Director of the Coalition, and excuse me, I have a lot of exciting things to talk to you about today. Today's webinar is set up in a meeting format, so if you could go ahead and mute yourself and use your very best meeting etiquette, that would be greatly appreciated. We do have the opportunity to mute and unmute folks, so we'll do that as we need to. But as we go, please feel free to drop questions in the chat. Feel free to DM myself or Carter. And just generally want this to be an engaging session. We do not expect that you stay on camera. I'm just excited that people are listening. So if you need to be off camera, that's fine. If you are just joining us, please, we are asking you to introduce yourself in the chat and then include your name, your organization, and your favorite workforce buzzword. And that'll give us a little bit of a sense of who's in the room. So for those of you who are new, the Ohio Workforce Coalition was founded and organized in 2007, specifically as a response to increasing numbers of Ohioans who were working and still not getting by. And so this notion of how do we both support incumbent workers, but also make sure that individuals are growing and advancing within their careers, or excuse me, within their careers in a variety of sectors. We have over time evolved to be a pretty significant size stakeholder group, and I'll share more about that as we move into the discussion today. But overall, we care about the individual Ohioan who's at the table. We care a lot about employers and their access to quality talent. And we care about Ohio's workforce systems and how do we support those systems, but then also look at accountability and so on, and what data do we need and how do we continue to improve. So again, thank you for being here. These webinars are the fourth Thursday of every month. Usually you do not have to listen to me for the entire hour. I just do the greeting and hand it off to our colleagues from the leadership committee who have a variety of guests invited for each webinar. So if you'd like to check out previous webinars, you can do that online. The recordings are available, excuse me, and we are also posting more and more what our upcoming topics are. Kyle Fee from the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland will be coming next month, so be sure to tune in and learn more about some of his work on the job quality front. All right, let's jump in, Carter. So today, you've already been introducing yourself. We are going to do just a brief orientation to time and space, and that makes me laugh because I don't know much about the intersection of time and space, so that was funny to me. But then talk about what's new for the coalition in 2023. What is the work going to look like, and what are we hoping to accomplish? And then talk a bit about immediate next steps, and then, of course, field all of your questions. As I mentioned, feel free to drop questions in the chat. You certainly don't need to wait until the end. Next slide. So we have a group of leadership committee, a leadership committee group that is really the group of people who guide and inform the work along the way. So along with the members of our network, these are the folks who answer questions, flag things that are key issues we need to be looking at, and provide input about the strategies that we're deploying. I am very grateful for their time and engagement, and I know that a couple of them were planning to be on our call today, but if you have questions, if you have comments, if you want to talk to someone at the leadership level, please don't hesitate to reach out to them. They're folks who have been doing something related to workforce for quite a while, as well as folks who are connected to public policy, advocacy efforts, research and data, and programming. So really a great group of people there. I do want to also acknowledge that we have two new, well, you know Carter, but Carter is going to, you're going to keep seeing more of her throughout this year. Carter's going to be working more closely with the coalition as we execute on some of the things that we will talk about this year. And then I'm not seeing her right now, but Meredith Whitehead is going to be working as a network manager for the coalition throughout at least the first half of this year, again, as we deploy some of the new strategies that we'll discuss. And so when Meredith pops on, we will be sure to introduce her, and any of the leadership committee members who are here, feel free to say hi, introduce yourselves. Next slide. So last, about a year ago, I was on this newsletter or on this webinar talking about how the coalition was celebrating 15 years. And that was quite an accomplishment. When I sat down and really dug into what the activities looked like over the course of those 15 years, I was really wowed. So you see there just kind of a simple representation of the sorts of things we've been doing over the course of the last 15 years. There's been some ebb and flow, as with any sort of advocacy and policy work, but we have attempted to, at the very least, keep the information sharing going and continue conversations with our elected officials and actually appointed officials, state agency officials. So that was the time piece of the kind of orienting you to where we are today. And then the workforce space has really evolved over those last 15 years. WEA became WEOA. We've got a new senator in Ohio. We saw congressionally designated spending go and come back. And it's hard to believe, but the Office of Workforce Transformation is 10 years old now. And that was some work that the coalition did early on. So the workforce space has a lot more organizations and people in it right now. There is certainly a lot more attention being paid to the dynamics of workforce and talent, as well as the intersection of people and the employers who are hiring them. So the space has hardly gotten more simple. It's gotten more complex. And I know many of you have been working in the space for a long time. Other of you are new. And I think just kind of sitting with the fact that the field is changing and evolving is really important as we think about the role of the coalition going forward. Next slide. So despite some of that 15 years, and despite the evolution in the space, we know that many Ohioans are still working but poor. We have certainly not really seen a slowdown in challenges that the business community has been facing relative to hiring. I don't know about you, but I would posit that collaboration and alignment and some of the systems level work is really still difficult. It doesn't just happen. It's something we have to be thinking about all the time. And then skill development, particularly now, really is a lifelong endeavor. You don't get the luxury of just, sort of getting one credential and sitting back and coasting on that. So there are these challenges that warrant increased continued focus on both building capacity in the field, as well as continuing to take a look at the policies and practices that the field are deploying or is deploying as we continue to evolve. And so I'm spending time on this because despite some of the challenges, despite the fact that it's been years and years and years, I think there really are new frontiers and there is hope, and that energizes me. When I started doing work specifically at the state level in Ohio was not funding sector partnerships. There was sort of this idea that sure, if we could do it, maybe we would think about it. But now there are widespread industry sector partnerships across the state, supported with state money. There are new models and new ways of working that have been evolving. I talked already about how the field is evolving. I think it's important that we talk about all of this because an approach, any sort of approach to equity requires it. And while I tried to come up with something better than this all hands on deck, it is the idea that we're all in this together from a systems perspective. It used to be that, there was less integration, I think, between different programs and services. And nowadays, you really, collaboration is the norm, and you really do need to figure out how to work in various parts of the system, both with the employer community, with your own colleagues as players in the system, and with the individuals who we are hoping to support. So that's why I even went through all of that. So the coalition, as a result of that, envisions a future when Ohioans have equitable access to opportunity with the supports they need to actually take advantage of it. Ohio businesses have skilled workers who are able to advance in quality jobs, and Ohio's workforce ecosystem is aligned, transparent, inclusive, and accountable. And I think in another webinar, we could go more deeply into what exactly that looks like. But this is really, are we doing what we say we're going to be doing? And do we have the data and stories to support it? So the coalition's way of advancing our vision is to really work in two key strategic areas. One is building and engaging individuals and organizations across the state. And then the second is developing and advocating for the policy priorities that emerge both from conversations with those individuals, but also from our own conversations with public officials, other stakeholders, what we're seeing on the national agenda, and so on. So I'm going to start with giving you just a snapshot of the current network. This is it. I mean, you can see that there's a pretty nice distribution across organizations. We've got about 700 individuals across the state. We are pretty female, and it's not necessarily surprising. And then from a race and ethnicity perspective, dominated by whites, but certainly focusing on and looking to increase diversity across each of the areas. We do have strong engagement from our metro areas. We have a lot of focused attention on diversifying into more of our rural areas and looking at other indicators like age and any other number of diversity factors. Next slide. So as I mentioned, looking at increasing geographic diversity, we're also exploring what it means to make sure that we are inclusive of all members. It's one thing to have, to focus on recruiting certain folks. It's another to make sure that they're feeling heard and like they're included in the work of the coalition. We will be talking in a moment about individual and organizational members, and then we are thinking a lot about clear partnerships with other stakeholder groups. Many of you don't just show up with your workforce hat, you're also coming from economic development, or you're coming from human services, or you're involved in a range of other associations, and we want to make sure that we are clearly partnering with those organizations. Next slide. So what we are going to do to build that network, we are announcing today a formal membership structure. And this membership structure has been vetted by our leadership committee. We will be posting the official details on our website, but there will be individual and organizational options starting at $200. We have carved out a special designation for smaller organizations and for partners. So just as I mentioned, I know many of you have multiple organizational memberships. We want to not infringe on that. We want to keep it and make it possible for you to also engage with the coalition. But we've also really worked hard at looking at what sorts of services and tools we might make available to you so that there's increased value in being part of the network that we've been putting together. The second thing we are working on or have been working on are regional affiliates, and these would be coalition, or these are coalition partners in specific parts of the state. that are really sort of our go-tos on, getting regional perspectives, getting a better idea of what local stakeholders think, and then also for being able to help us execute on some of the training and professional development offerings that we're bringing to the table. So more on that. Our first affiliate is in Northeast Ohio. The Northeast Ohio Workforce Coalition is centered in Cuyahoga County. I think many of you are familiar with them, but I am eager to talk to anyone who's interested in having the same sort of conversations elsewhere across the state. So as we looked at this network and the current involvement in the network, we have had mostly passive engagement. Certainly anytime we reach out and ask someone, could you work on this? What do you think of that? We have a lot of success getting engagement from there, but just by virtue of how we've been set up, it's mostly information. We're pushing information out. We're hosting some information sharing each month in the webinars. We bring in national experts there, but there's less deep engagement when it comes to the meetings with elected officials, calls to action, and really the mobilizing the network piece of advocacy. And so we are really looking to build that and have developed a few strategies. So next slide, please. Have developed a few strategies that will move us so that the engagement at the newsletter and more passive level isn't what the primary types of or levels of engagement are, that we're looking at increased knowledge transfer. We're going to be launching 2 different peer learning groups where individuals in the field will have an opportunity to talk to each other across Ohio, share ideas, identify challenges, but really learn from each other. And then we are continuing to look at more deep and regular engagement. So that is going to be through the regional meetings, for example, more engagement with public officials, as well as individuals who have been appointed by those officials to serve on boards or work in the state agencies. So really trying to deepen some of that engagement and make it more regular, but also having calls to action on the state level that we are releasing, and then making professional development opportunities available to individuals in the network. So what that looks like is the regional stakeholder networking and briefings. We are going to be offering an annual conference probably over the summer, and also a day at the State House, which hopefully will happen definitely will happen after the budget process, and hopefully in concert with other partners who care and would be doing advocacy around workforce issues. We are going to be deploying some tools and research for members to use in meetings, whether they are meetings with local, state, or federal officials that are coordinated by the coalition or through other means. And then we are launching 3 specific professional development opportunities. One is through Skilling America, which is a nationally known curriculum that was developed by an organization called Hope Street Group. That curriculum covers leadership development, career coaching, some data analysis, and collaboration and partnership. And it's really intended to be an online, well, it is an online self-paced tool, but it's intended to be and offer the foundational knowledge that folks need in the field. And it's relatively inexpensive. So you'll be able to learn more about that. We are thrilled to have been selected to offer the Aspen Institute's Workforce Leadership Academy. It's launching in Cuyahoga County this, like right now, applications are open. So if you're in Cuyahoga County, take a look at it, but hope to be able to take that to other locations across the state. And then we will be partnering with another national organization to offer a job quality assessment tool that is no cost to employers, and it is a good way to have a conversation about what sort of characteristics their workplace has and their jobs or their workplace needs to have. So again, some good professional development and peer learning opportunities. really to hopefully foster more engagement, but also provide you all with resources that can help you be more successful in what you're doing every day. So as I mentioned, we've got the network side of our work and then the public policy side. The public policy side has been informed by member surveys throughout our history. So we've always started from a place of checking in. We have traditionally had policy priorities focused on what we think would be best for individuals, what would be best for employers, and what would be best to strengthen the workforce systems. So these that I've shared up here are the policy priorities that we worked on towards the end of 2019 and launched in 2020, and COVID hit as we were starting to execute. So we have maintained these priorities, but shifted really what it looked like to execute on them. So let's see, you want to go, well, I can share here. So for example, if you look at the Supportive Services Fund, there was a lot of investment through CARES to specifically address supportive service needs and the crisis of housing and food supports and rental assistance and so on. Across Ohio, there was also incredible investments made by philanthropy, both in providing cash to make sure that individuals had what they need, but also taking steps to advocate for increased supportive services. So what we ended up doing in that space was really jump in to support Advocates for Ohio's Future, and they are the human service advocacy group. If you don't know them, you should check them out. And supported them really leaning into broadband access and affordability, especially because everything was happening, 95% of everything was happening online at that point. Really wanted to make sure that people had access to the hardware, but then access to affordable broadband services as they were going through COVID. From the employer designation, well, you can go ahead. So each of those are priorities that we used to inform our work over the course of the last 2 years. But in the fall of 2022, we really decided that it was time to take stock. The budget was coming up. We were increasingly, I don't want to say fully returning to normal, but there was more of a return to starting to meet in person, and it was time to officially take stock of where we are with those priorities. So we looked at what was already happening. We surveyed our members and asked them what sorts of things they were hearing, they were working on, what was most important. And we identified some gaps that we're going to share here, but also saw those as opportunities for moving forward. So these two charts represent what respondents to the survey indicated were the most important public policy topics that they ran into during the normal course of their work. And then the areas in which they were doing, where they were actively working. And so I put them next to each other to show you that, there is quite a bit of alignment. People in the field are working on the things that are most important to them, with the exception of some of the data and federal policy work. And I think digging into that in a bit more detail could be interesting, but certainly you see mostly consistency between what people are doing and what is deemed most important. By way of reference, funding was specifically focused on increasing state general revenue investments in workforce and related services. Supportive services spoke to increasing the overall availability of services across a wide range of specific services. Excuse me. And then let's see, job quality gets to the workplace characteristics and what is a good workplace. I know that popped up as one of the buzzwords. And then what is Ohio doing to identify them within economic development conversations and policy choices, and then working with employers to help them improve. And then equitable access really came from, was informed by COVID, certainly came about as the need to reduce disparities that we see in access to education and training, rates of employment, earnings, and other indicators that really we continue to see disparities for people who have been historically excluded from opportunity. And so those four, it was not surprising that those four topics popped up as the most reported topics. I think what was more surprising is what didn't show up here, but that's a different webinar. But I think we want to take a moment, let you sit with this, and then get your thoughts as to whether or not, I know at least a couple of you took the survey, but whether or not this resonates with you. Do these seem like the right topics or not? So Carter, do we have a poll?
Yeah, so I just launched a poll if you want to let us know what you think are any urgent or important topics that are missing. So like Rebecca said, these are just the top responses, not necessarily all of the responses we received, but we want to hear from the people on the webinar what you think is important.
So we'll give you just a few more seconds. Oh, we have one answer. Thank you for whoever did that.
This response will also help us, it'll inform what future webinars we offer this year as well.
So we can leave that open for a bit and still move on. I would love for you to drop in the chat if you are from a recent work. The recent was defined as within the last 1 or 2 years. Have you been working on these topics? And would love to just, if you have feedback in the chat about what sorts of policy issues you're working on and how they show up for you. I think it would be interesting to see if there's things we just didn't think about from even from a survey perspective. So from the public policy priority setting process, really what we want to do is continue to do a deep dive on the top 4 priorities. So these priorities, again, are fairly broad. They include a wide range of potential policy levers and policy implications. And so going through an exercise and identifying what in each of those areas can move through the General Assembly or has to move through the General Assembly versus what can move through state agencies is a first step. Identifying potential champions for any of the specific topics. Identifying potential partners, and then not but outlining some immediate next steps. This will intersect with the budget process, and I've got a couple examples of work we'll be doing to share with you, but it will intersect with the budget process. And really what we want to do is mobilize our network to be able to support the priorities that we've identified. So whether it's digging more into local discussions and equipping local champions, or helping to support organizations interested in some federal advocacy or whatnot, we really want the education of elected officials to come from local partners. And actually, I will take a moment and pause because I think we have one of our new, or he was on, but Representative Nick Santucci, who is a freshman from the Mahoning Valley area was on, and I don't think he's still on, but thank you for joining if you are still here. He would be hopefully one of the champions that we can work with as this new General Assembly comes together. So I wanted to share two examples from a public policy perspective of what that means. So that process that I just articulated of identifying challenges, looking at the top priorities and sort of piecing together what an advocacy or public policy agenda would look like there. So the top two areas of interest have been funding and supportive services. So from a funding and supportive services perspective, the SNAP employment and training program has been a long time topic. Maybe show me with a thumbs up if you're familiar with that program or not, and I can say a few words about it. It looks like not too many. So let's see, a couple. Rachel, I just keep seeing your thumb, and Aaron, and okay. So SNAP employment and training are the services that are available to individuals receiving food supports. There are basic SNAP employment and training programs that are contracted out a lot of the time across the state. There are additional SNAP employment and training services that can be delivered with creative funding through some federal reimbursements that are available. That is an insanely oversimplified description of the program. We have a webinar on it we can share, but SNAP employment and training, Ohio is one of only 8 states that is currently a mandatory employment and training state for individuals receiving SNAP support. So adults who are receiving SNAP and are not working are required to participate in employment and training services. What we know from a policy perspective is that doesn't, or from a national data perspective, is that that's not the most effective way to deliver SNAP employment and training services. And so that's one potential policy lever, making it a voluntary program. There are opportunities to look at the SNAP state plan and increase the number of services that are written into Ohio state plan to allow for more post-employment coaching. Right now, job retention, as far as I'm aware, I haven't read it within the last 48 hours, but as far as I'm aware, there's some services that are not included officially in the plan that it would be valuable to include. And so those are the kind of things that come up in as you think about what are the levers from a public policy perspective. And a couple of those are also opportunities to work with state agencies versus trying to push something through the General Assembly. And so, in this example, it's being really explicit and deliberate. Actually, Rachel, you are a SNAP expert, I think, SNAP employment and training expert. So please jump in if you have anything to add, but really looking at what can you move through a state agency versus through the General Assembly, where are there existing champions? And we know that at ODGFS, there has been a lot of talk about what to do with SNAP and employment, or what opportunities there is to continue to work on SNAP employment and training programming. There are conversations about funding. I believe that there's a cross-departmental group that has been exploring specific interventions with best practices shared through the National Skills Coalition, Skills Summit, Skills in the States, wrong event. I apologize, Aaron. But the idea is that there's momentum there already. And so to the extent we can uncover opportunities that would benefit from targeted and specific advocacy efforts to support work that directly impacts education and training activities, while also identifying specific policy levers, that's really a sweet spot for us. So this is relevant to the budget process because state general revenue funds can be used to draw down additional federal dollars. And if we can collectively advocate and share more about that program, and we can draw down and we can get GRF funds, general revenue funds specifically allocated to this, we can draw down more federal funding, which means more effective and efficient programming. So I want to pause for a minute. I see there's a couple of things in the chat. Are there questions on that from a how do we identify it? Oh, okay. So Kathy, you have a question. Are you able to share any national data on why oh yes, there's a lot of data available. Thank you, Rachel. There is quite a bit. So yes, we should be able to easily get that to you. Rachel Cahill just shared a link. And that's a great point. This gets back to the data question. Do we have the data we need? Do we have the potential to disaggregate the data so we know what's working and who it's working for, and what do we do with it? So thank you, Rachel. So here's another question. Is someone new to the conversation? How are the stories? Oops, it just jumped. How are the stories data priorities combined or aggregated as it's related to a state or higher level? So that's a great question. I think that is, I didn't get to add an example. I went to change my example and didn't put it back in here, but there is a system and data example from a policy perspective. I think that's actually oftentimes a gap. There is some work being done right now, in part with support by the Deaconess Foundation, and Kathy Belk, their president, is with us today, to look at various public benefit streams and and SNAP being one of them, what we can see about that data across the state and then in specific geographies of the state. And so the connection of various data sources various data tends to be based on individual levels of inquiry, and then whether or not the data is collected and rolled up versus just collected differently at each level. And right now, even across public benefit streams, there is huge variability in what's available and what is tracked at different levels. And so we'll have an audit of that, as well as a report looking at public benefits by demand occupation in Ohio. And I should go back and see, does that answer your question, Alicia? And you don't have to, you can jump on or you can put it in the chat. So let's see, I think Nicole mentions, Nicole, there are providers in Cuyahoga County, and Cuyahoga County has done a good job of advocating for using local levy dollars for funding SNAP employment and training. So you can't use federal dollars to match federal dollars. And so several counties, Cuyahoga County, Hamilton County has really been a leader in that space, have figured out how to use local dollars to draw down and offer some voluntary programs. And those have been really interesting to watch. And then there's a question, I think, is a government agency that's responsible. It's terrible because it's a concept. Yes, absolutely. Casey, do you want to say more about that? If not, everyone can see it in the chat. This is why mandatory is bad. And I think that there are lots of conversations about mandatory programming across the board. If you look at even for cash assistance, to some extent, some of you serve cash assistance recipients. So anything we can do to both focus on the quality of the programming being delivered, as well as the voluntary status and the longer term maintenance of supports for the individuals receiving it, I think the better off we'll be. And I think, okay, yes, I appreciate that. Just her perspective as the county administrator. Yeah. And there, that's important. And I appreciate you sharing that. It's one of the values of this group. I think this cross stakeholder group, the fact that we've got a range. I see we've got Paige from ODGFS who works on public policy. We've got some national folks, we've got philanthropy, we've got local workforce folks, we've got provider folks. So I think that's what makes this group unique, and what excites me about this work, that we've got a number of different perspectives coming together, and sometimes we agree and sometimes we agree to disagree, but the idea is that we're listening to each other. So another example I sort of alluded to, but this is about, from a public policy perspective, the intersection of access to opportunity and job quality. So we collectively hear a lot about how, about the benefit cliff, about what individuals can or can't do by way of advancement relative to the quality of the jobs that they're in. And in the report I mentioned that looks at the demand occupations that would keep people at the cliff, you can really see that there's a lot of jobs out there that maintain a level of dependence on public benefits. And as professionals who are working to continue to promote economic self-sufficiency, this is of interest, and we have to get the conversation about quality workplaces and quality jobs into the conversation about benefit cliffs. So changing public policy is certainly important relative to helping people avoid the cliffs, but part of that is setting a standard to some extent about what we think of public investments in jobs that keep people poor. And we don't know where individuals who are facing the cliff are working in Ohio. This is a data point. We don't know from any comprehensive data set what, how they're distributed. We know using PUMS data, which is public use microset data, self-reported benefit receipt, but there's a lot of work to be done to look at the occupations that we're really moving people to training people for, and kind of where they end up once they're there. And then there is a conversation to be had about the racial composition of individuals in those jobs and really getting into some occupational clustering, which again, if you've been in the equity conversations, that concept is not necessarily new. We know that it happens, but also looking at what does it mean for access to benefits. My third point, well, let me look at the chat again. There's work underway to get a minimum wage increase on the state ballot. Yes, and the minimum, as we think about characteristics like that, minimum wage increases, what we want to see in overall policy, where do we want to take a stand on those sorts of job characteristics is incredibly important. And many of you may already know that the notion of actually talking to workers about what they want to see in the workplace and giving voice to that doesn't show up necessarily as a public policy conversation, but it certainly shows up within the realm of civic engagement. And as we think about mobilizing networks, how do we equip both the individuals we're working with as well as ourselves, frankly, to be able to show up and support those conversations. So from the third example I had from a policy priority, many of you may have seen that Governor DeWine released an executive, that's the end of it, Carter, you can share you don't have, you can close it. Governor DeWine issued an executive order earlier this month looking at or requiring the Office of Workforce Transformation, the Ohio Department of Higher Ed, Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, and Ohio Department of Education to dig into kind of the network of education and training providers available across the state, what they're offering, and collectively how they can work together to recruit more students. And I think that from a workforce system accountability perspective, and I'm sorry I didn't have this on the slide, and transparency perspective, it is important that those sorts of efforts are not just looking at what programs exist and how can we get more people into them, but we also ought to be considering how they're performing, what we're seeing by way of innovation in the space, who various training programs are best serving. Can we ensure that once someone has access to the program, they'll get what they need to successfully complete? This whole other bucket of questions that come up that really are important, both with looking at how we recruit into the sector, but are also, or into post-secondary, but are also important for other education and training programs. The executive order mentioned that there's a high focus on sector partnerships across the state and a lot of investment in sector partnerships. And then many of you have probably seen the tech cred numbers come out. And we don't know too much about the impact of that work. And so really trying to dig in, get a better understanding of the results that have been generated by the investments that have been made, who are they best serving, and how do we address any disparities or other issues that show up in the data. So we will be reaching out to everyone to share more details. I really am, it's always a little difficult to say, we're launching a membership structure. Folks wonder what that means. We do want it to be as inclusive as possible. We're not going to turn people away if they can't join in that, in any specific capacity. We want to keep these conversations going, but we also want to be able to generate some more activity, and you have to have resources to do that. We will be reaching out to share with everyone what the various tiers of membership are and how you can officially become a member, but also encourage feedback. If you've got ideas, if you've got other things that, you really wish that you could talk to an expert for half an hour as part of membership, share those ideas. Nothing is set in stone. We're going to give it a try. But then also keep an eye out for regional meetings. If you are interested in being involved or helping to host some of the regional information sessions or otherwise participate, please definitely make sure you are on the listserv so that we can get that information to you. If you are interested in ways that you can support the public policy side of things, certainly welcome engagement in that as well, because it's one thing to say we're going to tackle this. It's another to kind of dig in and do the nitty gritty analysis, and we will be busy with the budget. So that's my spiel. And I hope someone turns their camera on to talk to me because everyone's off. No pressure. Let's see what we've got here. Do we have tech cred numbers yet? Well, that is a loaded question. The tech cred numbers are the last I asked for them, it was public record request, and it was right after the beginning of COVID, and the first round of reimbursements had just become eligible to be submitted. And so at that point, what we were seeing was that, and I think actually in large part, what we see a lot of is reporting out on numbers of credentials approved and numbers of dollars invested, which does not lead to numbers of people who received credentials and numbers of dollars reimbursed. And so that is it's a high interest topic, but I don't have anything new to share on that. Anyone else want to share on tech cred? Let's see. Catherine, to add anticipating future jobs for students in K-12. Yes, that gives me heartburn because I have a 7- and 8-year-old, and short of them telling me that they want to get on the job training to be YouTubers, they know a lot about workforce because they listen to me all the time, but man, that is such an important point. And the jobs really, this notion of lifelong learning and being able to really center on skills and competencies. Hi, Judith. Center on skills and competencies that cross different occupations, hugely important. And as we think about, I thought it was in here someplace, but I did not mention it. But as we think about what's next for the field and the things that have come up, looking at competency-based hiring, looking at and training, looking at 2-gen strategies that are more and more getting a lot of traction. And, I think that there's a lot of ways that we can get to that, but yeah, that's a really great point. Paige has numbers to offer, it looks like. Oh, yes. I can say the same thing. So the workforce board directors, and we're going to hopefully do something featuring them here soon to hear from them, but they do get a report of companies that had asked for tech cred numbers, and I believe they get who didn't get it, but it sounds like they might also get who was awarded. Paige, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, so we have like a data sharing agreement where development sends us after each round the list of all the companies who were awarded, who were partially funded, and who were not funded. So that's just the opportunity for, those directors to take a look and see who's engaged with the public workforce system and who, and, obviously has contact information so they can reach out and potentially offer some other services in addition to, the tech cred.
Thank you. Yep. And I don't suppose that's something you could share more widely. I mean, I think there's lots of us that would be interested in that. I know that there is a high rate of tech cred funding companies who ask for it, but I think there would be level of interest. And actually, as we think about public policy, if you look at the tech cred data, I mean, it is great. One of the priorities of that initiative is to make it as easy as possible for companies to access data or to access the resources. But there's some of the data collection is voluntary. And I mean, when it's voluntary, the likelihood that it is completed thoroughly and accurately just drops. And so for, a lot of the applicants, the data isn't there. And so from a policy perspective, the policy intervention comes in with saying, can we convince the Office of Workforce Transformation to make some of that, this handful of data points mandatory. And so opposite of the SNAP, we want to go the other direction. And again, it's so that we're investing public dollars. How do we get the data we need to make better decisions about those dollars? So it looks like Merle, you're talking about, yeah, so this is within the healthcare sector, I believe, is that right? Working on some background check clearance requirements for certain jobs within healthcare. And so that will continue, I think, to be a priority. There's also some work that was happening out of the Ohio Poverty Law Center around driver's license reinstatement and, making sure that people can drive to get to work. And I did, and Paige, I don't think I'm not allowed to say this, but I did hear that there's also some new support coming in to do outreach for individuals who are non-native English speakers for unemployment compensation. And so that's another more outreach focused topic, but again, different opportunities to engage. Rachel.
Hi, thanks. I know you're almost out of time, but I just wanted to, since SNAP employment and training came up and it's obviously a big policy topic, I just wanted to make a note on framing that folks might want to think about, because we've gotten some feedback as we've been trying to talk about how to reform this program. And, I think we need to think of the word voluntary as like a naughty word that we don't say, because it really gives the wrong impression to what the intention of the program is. And instead saying, we want to, reimagine our workforce training program to match the needs of employers and to promote economic development. When we talk about it that way, we hear both legislators and administrators all across the state really agree that our current system isn't working and we need to think of it differently. And looking at states like Tennessee that have really effective programs, I think is the way to talk about it. So I'm trying to do that myself, but I just thought I'd say it out loud for everyone else.
That is such helpful feedback. And I think overall it's critical feedback. We have to be very careful about messaging. This is top of mind for me relative to some of the benefit cliff conversations and public benefit receipts. Where do you see different people getting public benefits at different rates, and what does that mean? Because one misstep and you end up with a graph showing up somewhere and just misinterpreted. So thanks for that reminder, and definitely interested in continuing to talk about messaging and deferring to our friends over at AOF a lot around some of the human service stuff. And others on the economic development end. So thanks for saying that. We have 2 minutes. Does anyone want the last? I mean, I hardly ever can actually give the last word because I talk so much, but would anyone like to attempt to have the last word? Okay. Nikki, no, she doesn't want to talk. Okay. Well, thank you. What? No. Okay.
I said hello.
Thank you very much for being here. It is incredibly difficult to try to capture everything that we want to share in 1 hour. So thank you for bearing with me and listening to it all. There really is some exciting stuff. Check out the Skilling America options. Keep an eye on the Aspen Institute work in Cuyahoga County. And certainly we would love to have you thinking about how to become a member. I would also, there's a lot of people on this call I don't know on a one-to-one level. So I would welcome the opportunity to do some meet and greets and to touch base with you, find out what drove you to show up today and how the coalition can connect with the work that you're doing. So please do reach out. And I think Eric Johnson, I know I owe you an email. I promise you it will come today. So I see you. Okay, I think we're set. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week.